Of course, there are a few people in the area who focus on various techniques. Perhaps someone who specializes in cognitive.
Wait. I ordered, lifting a hand while trying to process his swift words. I hated it when he got all doctorly on me. He met my gaze and grinned widely.
Excuse my haste. I'm almost expecting you to change your mind at any second.
His grin abruptly faltered, and his gaze turned hesitant, as he released the cards in the Rolodex.
Bella, you should take some time to really consider this.
He spoke in a dispirited voice, and the absence of his earlier enthusiasm deflated me.
I just couldn't bear giving Esme's hopes up if you decided not to follow through.
He clarified, his expression remaining carefully stoic. It didn't escape my notice that he said Esme's hopes, but really meant my hopes. My grin returned as I realized why Carlisle had been so excited before. He knew that it would make Esme happy, but he was also getting something in return, the opportunity to help someone who needed it. This was a privilege that Edward never granted him, even though he'd likely spent years attempting. Well, I was going to be that person. It only further solidified my determination. The pros were beginning to outweigh the cons. I always follow through on what I say, I reassured him tightly, realizing that was just one more trait that made me unlike Edward. Plus, if I had even a fraction of a chance to get inside that closet, I'd take it. He narrowed his eyes for a moment, scrutinizing my determined expression, before his lips slowly turned up into a forcibly subdued grin.
If you're positive then.
He sighed, unconvincingly aloof. I am. I nodded, gaining much pleasure, as the enthusiasm returned to his expression. In an effort to make him feel as useful as he undoubtedly desired, I added, and I trust you to find the right person. Truthfully, my nerves over the whole thing were beginning to shine through, and I made certain to add my restrictions as he began once again flipping through the Rolodex, nodding at each caveat. When he discovered my fear of being locked away after being triggered, he assured me that Esme would allow no such thing to happen, and since she would be responsible for the legalities of it, it gave me a small measure of comfort. I stood to leave then, tucking the envelope under my arm, and he gazed at me quizzically, the enthusiasm in danger of disappearing. I put on a bit of show, biting my lip and pulling at the ends of my sleeves timidly. Do you mind, maybe? I trailed off in a false show of uncertainty, setting it all up for me? I hedged with a cautious expression. His grin broadened as he nodded, and returned to the task of pilfering contacts, an air of contentment and achievement about him as he worked. I spared him one last glance as I exited the study, and I felt a pang in my chest as I realized that this was Edward's doing. He'd closed Carlisle out for so long that he'd lost faith in his own abilities. He wasn't being patronizing or condescending when he smiled in relief at my progress. He was feeling proud of me and himself. He was feeling accomplished and supportive and grateful for the opportunity to experience it with me. That was Carlisle's place in the world, and without that purpose, he felt lost and worthless. He had more money than most of the population of Forks combined, but all of those things meant nothing to him. I'd wanted to repay him for so long for living in his house, and there were a variety of ways I could do that. I realized then that nothing I'd ever give Carlisle would be as cherished to him as the gift of giving him meaning. Dr. Carmen smiled down at her notepad and spent several minutes writing while I waited. A glance at the clock told me that my session had ended 10 minutes ago. I was ready to return to the bedroom, and idly considered going over the newest credit card statements once again, as she wrote. "Okie dokie," she exclaimed, finally sinking back into her chair as she grinned at me. "I'm ready to make my assessments, Miss Swan," she gloated. I rolled my eyes and waved my hand. "By all means," I grumbled sourly, wondering how long this would take. I'd humor Carlisle for the most part, but if she couldn't get me into that closet, that's all it would be. Humoring him. She cleared her throat and used her hands to gather all of her glossy hair up into a knot atop her head. Her gaze was intense and calculating as it met mine. "You're not going to get better," she stated plainly, and my mouth opened to protest before she raised a hand.
No speaking while I assess,"
she ordered softly, and I closed my mouth with a glare at her scrutinizing gaze.
"We're not going to get better, because you aren't doing it for yourself. We're here to get back at Edward, and you're here to please Dr. Cullen, and you aren't, but you aren't doing it for you,"
she continued, leaning forward as my guilty gaze shifted to the window.
"This whole obsession you have with the closet is just the manifestation of a desire for Edward's loyalty."
She shrugged, and I met her gaze with an amused expression. "Seriously? This really was psychobabble?" She smiled, and continued,
"His room is symbolic of him, and the closet is that one little nook that you can't access. It's probably comparable to the part of his heart that he's reserved for his mother, but I won't elaborate on that."
She waved her hand in a dismissive fashion, and I stifled a mocking chuckle. Couldn't I just want inside a closet? She continued,
"You want to blame everyone else for his leaving, because you're used to that. You can blame Phil for just about everything that's wrong with you except for losing Edward. Instead, you choose to place blame on the nearest present bystanders, while ignoring the fact that no one is to blame in the grand scheme of things."
She crossed her legs and sank back into her chair, while I swallowed down the lump that formed in my throat. I avoided her gaze as she relented.
"You feel alienated, because you alienate yourself from those around you. You had a brief period of time in which you allowed them to get close, but now you remember what it's like to lose someone you love, since Edward left."
I stood then, and pushed my hair behind my ears, not necessarily disagreeing with her every judgment, but too wearied to hear it if it wasn't directly related to the closet. When I stood, she rose with me and sighed, picking up the brown paper bag that she had entered with, and unceremoniously dumped the contents onto her desk.
"Cookies,"
she stated, removing a small sandwich bag with what appeared to be plain Nilla wafers inside. I met her gaze and quirked an eyebrow, crossing my arms over my chest in exasperation. She smiled.
"The daily cookies you once made were an expression of your companionship. It was special to you, and even though you might not realize it, it was even more special to them. Without that bridge you created, you have no way of linking them to yourself, or showing them how you feel. That, Miss One, is why you feel so alienated."
I caught one last glimpse of her smug expression, before I stormed out the door of her office. She was ridiculous and infuriating. I just wanted to get inside the closet. It had nothing to do with Edward. I could already tell that I'd have to go around